Lipstick-faced demon. The red-faced demon has to be one of the creepiest entities ever to come out of the Insidious franchise. He doesn't really feel like a typical ghost. Instead, he looks more like the kind of nightmare that stays stuck in your mind long after you've woken up. But where did this terrifying creature actually come from? The truth is, nobody really knows. His origins remain a complete mystery. However, some fans have theorized that he may have first appeared sometime in the 1700s, around the period when carnivals were becoming popular throughout the Caribbean. And honestly, that theory does make a strange amount of sense. Almost everything about his appearance feels like a twisted carnival performer who went horribly wrong. He has wild, messy clumps of hair sticking out from his head, hooves that make a frightening clattering sound whenever he walks, and long, razor-like claws that he constantly seems to sharpen. Then there's his disturbing grin, crooked, uneven, and almost devilish, looking like Pennywise's even more sinister twin, who was eventually kicked out of the circus for being far too terrifying. His home is the Further, a mysterious, fog-covered dimension outside the normal world, where countless lost souls wander endlessly. But unlike many of the other spirits trapped there, this demon isn't satisfied with simply drifting around. He has an appetite, and what he wants is the living. His goal is to take control of people, almost as though their bodies are costumes he can wear, while causing as much suffering as possible. This is what eventually brought him into contact with the psychic Elise Rainier, who was trying to help a young boy named Dalton Lambert. Dalton had the unusual ability to leave his physical body through astral projection, making him an especially attractive target for the red-faced demon. To the demon, Dalton was exactly the kind of vulnerable victim he had been looking for. But eventually, Dalton and his father managed to shut the door on him and send him back into the Further. Now, the demon remains there, waiting patiently and sharpening his claws, hoping for another opportunity to return and claim a new victim.
The Bride in Black is another major antagonist in the Insidious universe, but unlike some of the other creatures, he was once a human being named Parker Crane. Unfortunately, Parker's childhood was anything but normal. He was born in 1920 and raised by his mother, Michelle, an extremely controlling woman who had a disturbing influence over his entire life. Michelle hated the fact that her husband had given their son the name Parker, so she refused to acknowledge him by that name. Instead, she insisted that he was Marilyn. She transformed his bedroom with dolls and floral wallpaper, dressed him in wigs and gowns, and would physically punish him whenever he dared to call himself by his actual name. Unsurprisingly, the constant abuse had a devastating effect on Parker. As the years passed, his mother's cruelty became increasingly dangerous, eventually helping push him toward violence. When he became an adult, Parker turned into a serial killer. He abducted women while wearing a black bridal dress and veil, eventually earning the horrifying nickname of the Bride in Black in newspapers. He was connected to at least 15 murders. You might think Parker's story finally ended when he died in 1986, but that wasn't the case. Within the Insidious films, his spirit continued to exist inside the Further, where he remained trapped under the psychological influence of his abusive mother. Parker eventually attempted to possess Josh Lambert, hoping that taking Josh's body would give him another chance at life. However, Parker's power was closely connected to the memories and influence of his mother. Once Elise and Josh managed to destroy those memories and confront the connection inside the Further, the Bride in Black finally lost his hold and disappeared.
The Man Who Can't Breathe. The Man Who Can't Breathe may be one of the most disturbing and mysterious entities in the entire Insidious universe. Very little is actually known about where he came from, but his horrifying appearance immediately gives you an idea of what kind of creature you're dealing with. He has extremely pale, unhealthy-looking skin, a thin and fragile body, and his face is hidden behind an oxygen mask. He almost looks as though an illness itself has somehow been transformed into a living creature. Because oxygen tanks only became available during the 1800s, the version of the character we see appears to belong to a relatively modern period. Still, it's possible that the entity has existed for much longer and simply changes its appearance depending on the time period. Unlike the red-faced demon, whose strange carnival-like appearance can make him seem almost fascinating to children, the man who can't breathe relies on something completely different: pity. He presents himself as weak, sick, dying, or even strangely familiar, making people lower their defenses and feel sympathy for him. His territory is the Fleur-de-Lis apartments, a place where he has apparently been gathering souls for many years. Rather than simply taking someone's body, he pulls living people into the darkness of the Further and leaves them trapped in misery. His greatest weapon isn't physical strength, claws, or sharp teeth. Instead, he attacks through hopelessness. He slowly fills his victims with despair until they become willing to surrender. This is exactly what happened to Quinn Brenner after the death of her mother. The entity exploited Quinn's grief and emotional vulnerability, manipulating her until she nearly gave up her soul. But Quinn wasn't completely alone. The spirit of her mother returned and helped her find the strength to fight back. During the final confrontation, Quinn managed to rip away the entity's oxygen mask, releasing the life energy he had been stealing and feeding upon. Once defeated, the creature disappeared into the darkness of the Further, where he remains waiting for another opportunity.
Keyface. Keyface, also known as the Key-Bearer Demon, had been haunting Dubain State Penitentiary since at least 1953. However, there's a strong possibility that his presence there goes back even further, perhaps to the late 1800s, when the prison first began carrying out executions. The location was already filled with fear, suffering, and death, making it the perfect environment for a demon to establish itself. But Keyface doesn't operate in exactly the same way as the red-faced demon. Instead of trying to take over people's bodies, his method is arguably much worse. He captures souls and locks them away inside endless prison cells within the Further. Even his physical appearance seems deliberately designed to make victims trust him. With greasy hair and incredibly thin, skeletal-looking arms ending in keys, he can almost resemble someone who has come to help prisoners escape. But once someone puts their trust in him, those same keys become instruments of torture and imprisonment. He can use them to metaphorically lock away a person's throat, heart, and freedom. Elise Rainier encountered Keyface when she was still a child. He manipulated her into opening a particular door, and that decision ultimately resulted in the death of her mother. After that tragedy, Keyface continued influencing Elise's father, pushing him toward cruelty while using the souls of his victims as additional prisoners inside his supernatural jail. Years later, the demon returned to target Elise once again, this time going after her nieces. However, Elise received help from the spirit of her mother and was finally able to fight back. The power of light eventually burned Keyface away, leaving him trapped inside the Further, where he remained angry and waiting for another chance. The Doll Girl. The Doll Girl is another incredibly creepy spirit found within the Insidious series, and what makes her frightening is how straightforward yet disturbing her situation actually is. She isn't necessarily some incredibly powerful demon hunting down innocent people. Instead, she's a teenage girl who remains trapped inside the Further alongside her family. The horrifying part is what she's forced to experience there. Her family is condemned to repeatedly relive the moment of their violent deaths again and again, as though they're caught inside an endless supernatural recording. When Josh enters the Further, he eventually discovers a strange version of his own house. Inside, he encounters what initially appears to be a completely normal family from the 1950s. At first, everything seems harmless. They're simply sitting together in their living room, looking like an ordinary family. But the longer Josh watches them, the more unsettling the entire scene becomes. Eventually, he enters the dining room and notices the doll girl sitting at the table with a gun in her hand. She doesn't say anything, and at first she barely even moves. Then, without warning, gunshots suddenly ring throughout the house. Moments later, the doll girl appears back in the living room, wearing an eerie smile while the bodies of her family members lie dead around her. That unsettling smile is what makes her image so memorable. It almost gives the impression that she enjoys watching the horrifying event unfold around her.
Before Josh finally leaves, the family appears together one final time, all of them smiling as though nothing happened. Their tragedy seems to be trapped in an endless loop, ready to repeat itself whenever another unfortunate visitor enters the Further and witnesses their story.
The Ghoul. The Ghoul, more commonly known as the long-haired fiend, is one of those spirits from the Further that can make you uncomfortable the moment you see him. He doesn't have the appearance of a traditional demon that you might imagine coming straight from hell. Instead, he looks like a deeply disturbed man who lived a terrible life, died, and somehow carried all of that darkness with him into the afterlife. His face appears partially rotten, giving him an especially disturbing appearance. Long, greasy strands of hair hang down around his face, while a long black trench coat makes him look even more sinister. The first time we see him is in Insidious Original, when he quietly enters Dalton's room and clearly appears to be planning something dangerous. However, he immediately retreats when Josh enters the room. Later, while Dalton is under the influence of the red-faced demon, the Ghoul becomes more aggressive and attempts to attack Renee. Fortunately, Elise intervenes and forces the demon away, causing the Ghoul to retreat as well. But that doesn't mean he's gone for good. In Insidious Chapter 2, he returns for several brief appearances and jump scares. Then, near the end of Chapter 3, he appears once again, reminding everyone that he's still somewhere inside the Further. The most unsettling part about the Ghoul is that he has never truly been defeated. Nobody has destroyed him, permanently trapped him, or locked him away somewhere he can't escape from. He's still wandering through the Further in that same long black coat, waiting for another opportunity to return and create more chaos.
The Crawling Demon. The Crawling Demon doesn't need an elaborate introduction to become terrifying. He appears in Insidious The Red Door during one of the movie's most uncomfortable sequences, when Josh finds himself trapped inside an MRI machine. As Josh begins losing consciousness, a pale figure wearing a hospital gown slowly starts crawling toward him. Its movements are stiff, unnatural, and jerky, making it immediately clear that this isn't anything remotely human. It's exactly the kind of disturbing image that stays burned into your memory long after the scene is over. His design is relatively simple, but that simplicity makes him even more unsettling. He has extremely pale skin, a loose hospital gown, and a distorted crawling movement that makes his body look completely unnatural. There isn't much of an explanation given for who he is, where he came from, or what exactly he wants. He has no real backstory and doesn't need a long conversation to frighten anyone. His appearance alone is enough to make the scene disturbing. And that's what makes these creatures from the Further so terrifying. Sometimes you don't need to understand exactly what something is to be afraid of it. But if you want to uncover the identities and stories behind the terrifying entities of the Conjuring universe, then meet them all in every demon in the Conjuring universe.
Dark-haired woman. The dark-haired woman doesn't have a huge role in Insidious Chapter 2, but the few moments when she does appear are more than enough to make her memorable. Her first appearance begins with a simple and disturbing whisper, "Help me." She says it through a tin can telephone, almost as though she's simply looking for someone to respond to her. Then, without much warning, she casually emerges from a closet wrapped in a bedsheet, almost like someone who accidentally got caught taking a nap during the middle of a haunting. Her appearance follows the classic image of a frightening ghost. She has extremely pale skin, long and messy black hair, a completely emotionless stare, and almost no dialogue at all. Somehow, the fact that she barely says anything makes her even more disturbing. She doesn't need to scream or chase anyone. She simply stands there and stares as though she's silently judging everything about you. Unlike many of the other spirits, she doesn't spend her time hunting people down or attempting to possess them. She doesn't need to. Her presence alone is enough to create an unsettling atmosphere. She serves as another reminder that the Further is filled with countless lost, miserable, and terrifying souls who never found peace or closure after death.